Hi, everyone. This is Aaron Larson, executive editor of Power Magazine, and you're listening to the Power Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Tom Falcone. He is the president of the Large Public Power Council, or LPPC. Tom, thank you for coming on the program. Please tell a little bit about yourself and about the Large Public Power Council.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate the opportunity. I've been listening to your podcast for a long time, so pleasure to be here with you and share a few thoughts. A little bit about me and about LPPC. The Large Public Power Council, there's about 2,000 public power utilities around the country, but approximately 30 of them own 85 to 90% of the assets. And so these are big integrated systems or also utilities that provide transmission and generation services to lots of other utilities. So folks like the cities of Los Angeles and San Antonio and Jacksonville and Orlando, NYPA and Santee Cooper, and my former utility, the Long Island Power Authority. So that's a little bit about what we do. We work together on federal policy and we also share best practices. And as for me, I'm relatively new to Washington, D.C. I was the other new president in Washington, D.C. in January of this year, but I came previously from one of the members. I had started my career as an investment banker to large publicly owned utilities, a lot of them LPPC members. And I did that for about 14 years and then joined one of the members as the CFO, became the CEO, did that for about a decade. And now I'm representing those utilities in Washington, D.C. for LPPC.
You mentioned how many public power utilities there are out there, and I know you've got 29 members that are some of the largest. What sets public power utilities apart from investor-owned utilities, and why does that distinction matter today?
So we're in the same business, whether you're publicly owned, whether you're a co-op, or whether you're an investor-owned utility. Ultimately, you're in the same business. What is different about public power, and a lot of this has to do with the history of how these utilities were formed and going back to times even before regulation, and it can be different in every place. But the big difference is that we're accountable back home. We're publicly owned. We are not for profit. We are community oriented. We're mission oriented. And so our real goal and only goal in life is reliable, affordable power, sustainable power back home at the least cost to customers. So we're not necessarily looking to grow loads or grow earnings unless that's favorable to our community, unless we're meeting the needs of our community or lowering costs for them. As for why that's important right now, I think we have long been a major player in building the grid that we have, and we're currently in this extremely large build-out cycle. And so, because of our historic investments and our community relationships, we've had the assets, the right of way, we have the balance sheet and capital structure to invest, but most importantly, we have a lot of community trust. And so when we advocate in our local communities or state and federal government, they know that we're coming from a place that this is needed for the public. We're not advocating for our margins. We're doing this because it's best for our communities. And I think that gets you a lot of public trust in this environment where we all need to do an awful lot.
What are the biggest challenges that are facing your members today, and how are you helping to address them?
I think the biggest thing is that the load is arriving faster and lumpier and in a more concentrated fashion than it has in the past. And we're no different. We see a lot of growth. But historically, when somebody new came to town, they wanted, 5 megawatts, or maybe they were really large and they wanted 100 megawatts. But what we have today is folks who come to town and they want a gigawatt, which is enough to power probably 600,000 homes, depending on what part of the country you're in. So a lot of our members, about half the members, are seeing this, very, very rapid growth where they could double over the next 10 years. And what's interesting is that the demand for the energy is very immediate. Our ability to build the infrastructure is not immediate. We have to go through the same permitting and public processes and construction and supply chain, and it just doesn't allow us to build quite that fast. So we've got all these things that we're focused on right now that I would call process mismatches. And it doesn't matter whether you're public or an IOU or you're in a market or not, although those in organized markets are particularly affected. But our processes were developed for flat to declining loads over the last 20 years. And now we have to re-examine what we're doing with this rapid growth. We have to re-examine our queue processes. We have to re-examine the way we finance large loads and just rethink these things and scrape the barnacles off, to be honest, in order to move faster. We're never going to move as fast as data centers, but that we can move faster. And when we do that, we see we're in a better spot. We see that as we refine our processes and we get a better handle on the loads, that we're just going to be in a situation to reduce bottlenecks and constraints. So long story short, what are we helping our members on? We're looking at those things twofold. What lessons can we share from around the country? And then, secondly, what is important at the federal level? Because we're really only helping advocate at the federal level. What are shared bottlenecks at the federal level, whether they're at FERC or NERC, whether they're at EPA or Treasury, things that are very specific that would just help us move faster. And so those are two-bit things, but we're not that different than the rest of the industry. We are trying to deal with a situation where the load is coming on large and lumpy and fast, and rethinking what we need to be doing and what we need to do with federal policymakers around that.
What about technology? How has that changed the game for large public power companies or utilities? And I'm talking about things like artificial intelligence and automation and machine learning. And how do you think the federal government and policy should be supporting those measures?
So the really unique thing is that there's this great technology, AI, but anybody with $20 a month can access it. So that's a really unique thing. In terms of where I see our members on things like AI and automation and machine learning, a lot are starting, as you would, with low risk, high return type investments. So members are using AI to draft, the first draft for land acquisition and permitting paperwork, because it saves tons and tons of hours immediately, and it's not a major investment, and you still have it checked by people. So they take the first draft, they take hours out of it, but you don't have any risk of errors. A number of utilities are doing things like predictive maintenance and digital twins, and that really predates this recent surge in AI. I think a lot of our executives are using AI to just help think better. And matter of fact, anybody in a thinking job, I was at a meeting once and a hyperscaler said, well, your job isn't going to be taken by AI, it's going to be taken by somebody using AI, which is a good quip. And maybe it's even true. Uh, both those things may be true, right? But I really do think that AI is a wonderful research agent as long as you know the area well enough yourself. But it's wonderful, and it's also a great sparring partner. There's all these folks who have emails that say, I'm emailing you right now, but my hours may not be your hours. Well, that's not true with AI. They're good at any time you want to talk to them, day or night. So there's a lot that's going on there that's very, very promising. I think we're still at the dipping our toe in it. And then there's probably two great bottlenecks. And the first is execution and change management within the utility. And I'll just give you one very quick story about that. I heard one investor-owned utility CEO, and they were talking about creating an AI customer service agent, which when I heard that they were doing that, I said, my God, that'd be wonderful. When I was running a utility, what I wouldn't have done for that, because that has a lot of real value. If you had a reliable AI customer service agent, somebody who could answer the phone and deal individually with customers, nobody would ever have to wait on a call or wait on hold. They'd always be perfectly trained. You'd always have the right staffing at the right time. You would be in a situation where they would know the local geography and they would speak with the local accent, or if it was more friendly, they could speak with a British accent or whatever. So that'd be a wonderful technology if we could get there. The flip side of it, from my own experience, is if you go to prior versions of technology, frequently it wasn't the underlying technology; it was how well you implemented that technology, how far you went, how much you trained it with the use cases you specifically had, and how much you embraced that technology that made the big difference between everybody buying the same platforms, everybody having the same software, but some people got better results than others. So I think number one is the change management aspect doesn't change. And probably number two is there's a real bottleneck on data. You can have all the machine learning and things that you would like. The software is great if you have great, clean, well-structured data going into it. And if you don't have that, it's kind of a junk in, junk out. You asked about federal policy. I think generally speaking, the most innovative things here are happening in the private sector. So a lot of it really is not federal policy that's going to determine how well we use these things. To the extent they are regulated, they're generally regulated at the state level or at the local level by the local Public Utility Commission. So the real opportunity, though, is for forward-thinking management to encourage it within their own utility and to be on the lookout. And certainly, what we help our members with is that they cheat off each other, who's having good results with something. And then to the extent we can identify something that is being hindered by policy, for example, like the deployment of drones has long been hindered by certain line of sight regulations, well, we go after those things. But a lot of this is good management and taking advantage of good technology.
Yeah, that makes great sense. And I think your point about sharing the lessons learned amongst your utilities is really, I think, useful and helpful. Obviously, there's a lot of things happening in the industry. We hear about advanced nuclear technology that's being deployed and new things coming up with energy storage and clean energy procurement. Can you talk about any innovative projects that may be underway at some of your member companies and utilities, and what they're doing to kind of incorporate these new and advanced technologies into their larger loads?
Yeah, we're doing all of the above. We have members that are doing any technology you want to imagine, somebody's doing it. And in particular, with the need for in the more intermediate to long term clean, firm resources. So you mentioned nuclear or carbon capture, but going down the list, carbon capture, Sacramento Municipal Utilities District is doing something there on a natural gas plant. Hydrogen, LADWP, among others, is focused on looking at and deploying hydrogen as a fix for its in-basin current gas plant needs, that it's going to continue to need some in-basin, in the LA basin, firm resource. And so they're looking at hydrogen so it preserves dispatchability of their generation. We have a lot of members doing nuclear in all the various phases. About half our members own nuclear currently, but we have folks looking at SMRs as well as AP1000s. We have one member that was partnered up on the Vogtle plant with a Southern company, so they just finished their nuclear journey. We've got another one, Santee Cooper, that has the VC Summer plants in South Carolina and is looking to restart development there. And then we have other members that are at the beginning of the process. NYPA has committed to develop at least a gigawatt of new nuclear for New York. And those could be SMRs, those could be AP1000s. They're still making those choices. And we have a lot of utilities that are looking at early site selection and going down the path. So we've got folks doing batteries. We have folks doing lots of upgrades and refurbishments, a lot of transmission investment. I mean, you just go down the list. If you name the technology, and especially in an environment where you have load growth, people are investing, but they're also thinking about in the technology we have today, but also the technology we're going to need for 2035 and 2040. So we're doing it all.
When it comes to risks, obviously there's a lot of them out there. I think about cyber attacks and I think about extreme weather as two that are really raising the bar here in certain areas. How are public power utilities fighting or strengthening themselves and providing resilience against these sort of things?
I think this is one of those areas that if you're not focused on it, life is going to focus you on it pretty quickly. So, bad things are going to happen. For a lot of our members, they have regular weather risk. My former utility on Long Island, occasionally, probably twice a decade, you get a really bad storm. So you're naturally going to be very focused on it. And the storms seem to be a little more intense and the damage is more intense than it used to be. But everybody's got to focus on these things because everyone has some level of exposure to whether it's weather or wildfire. Everybody's got some level of exposure. And so, generally speaking, the way that the utilities are approaching it is that they're looking at their own risks and their greatest exposures and they're dialing in a plan in their investments. So whether they have hardening plans, if you're in an area that's subject to hurricane risk, you're going to be looking at things like elevating substations and stronger poles and wires and advanced reclosers. If you're in an area that's got, wildfire risk, you're going to be looking at things like line clearances and how do you detect it quickly and procedures to deal with times of drought. What's also pushing you is the financial community to some degree takes a checklist approach to this stuff. So, do you have a plan and do you follow it? Is very important to raising capital. And increasingly, since wildfire has been such a big risk in some locations, many states are looking at the same thing. Places like California and Utah, Wyoming, and others. If you're looking at wildfire, do you have a plan? Do you follow it? Insurance is looking at the same thing. So everyone is focused on it to the right degree for their own utility. Obviously, if you're in the middle of the desert, you don't have much hurricane risk, but everybody's got some level of risk. Utilities aren't just focused on the investment side, though. They're focused on supply chain and been much more aggressive, especially the last decade or so, about pre-staging mutual aid. So if I know a big storm's coming, calling in and pre-staging outside vendors and linemen and contractors in advance. Cyber, I don't know how you couldn't be focused on cyber, and there's the usual checklist of best practices, and a lot of that too is information sharing in the industry and cheating off others. But that is a major risk, and you mentioned even AI, and that's one where AI could be very useful to detection of cyber anomalies and risks. But frankly, AI is also going to be really useful for the people who are, bad guys and thugs and hackers and trying to beat your cyber defenses. So I think we're all focused on these risks, and there's kind of a checklist of best practices, but the environment that we're in, whether for your best interest of your customers or your regulators or the financial community, your insurers, there's a lot of eyes on it.
And of course, the federal government has undergone a lot of change since President Trump took office. You know, FEMA has had some changes. It's the Federal Energy Management Agency. Can you talk about how that could affect large public power utilities and how you view some of the things that are taking place in Washington?
Sure. Well, FEMA specifically has been an important tool historically for publicly owned entities, state and local governments. We're publicly owned by our nature, public power, co-ops as well. It's been an important tool to help communities recover after a large disaster of one kind or another and helps that community get back on its feet. So there's been a long history there. The challenge with FEMA is they have a very hard job to do. And over time, for lots of good reasons, we've developed perhaps also some barnacles on the hull of the way that it works, and it can be a little bit drawn out and a little bit bureaucratic. So there's lots of reform proposals because people are perhaps recognize the need for FEMA, but think they could do even better. And we kind of agree with those people that there's a real big need for FEMA. It's when you have a huge problem in a geographic area, and we all know the examples, whether it's a wildfire or a hurricane, it can be the difference between that community recovering or not. There are numerous proposals to make it better. There's one we like in particular, which is in the House. It's by Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, but it's called the FEMA Act of 2025, but it's the FEMA stands for something like Fixing Emergency Management for Americans. So it's not the normal FEMA acronym, but it's very creative naming. But what they're focused on is things like how do you get, sometimes there's long delays. So a community will be affected by a disaster, but it will take years to get the money rolling or the grants happening. How can we get grants that are more predictable, that fund the right things? How can we incentivize prudence and mitigation planning? How can we just limit our processes? I'll say that I had worked on some FEMA grants, probably half dozen of them or so over the years for my former utility. And we would procure everything for a public process because we were a public entity. And then when it came time to use federal money, we would have to reprocure everything. So, how many public procurements do you need to go through? We would have separate warehouses because we had FEMA goods and we had regular goods. So the bill, this FEMA Reform Act by Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson, deals with a lot of that feedback of saying, how could we, if we have a disaster in a community, we want to get the community on its feet as fast as possible. We don't want to spend 2 or 3 years doing paperwork when the paperwork often doesn't is duplicative and perhaps not adding as much value as we hoped. So we'll see, but that's I think it's good news. There's a bipartisan bill. There's the Trump administration is also looking at some FEMA reforms, and we'll see. But I do think it's a very important program, but also one that it is possible to do better.
You mentioned earlier about how public power utilities are deeply rooted in their communities, and how does that shape decisions and investments, especially when working with large new customers like data centers, for example?
Well, growth is good. We welcome it. We want data centers that, large manufacturers come to town. I think the challenge is you want to make sure we're not building infrastructure for them because we want to make money on it. We're not for profit. We're building the infrastructure so that they can come to town and they can make investments and that we can succeed as a country in these areas, be innovative, win the AI race. Who doesn't want to see manufacturing and jobs and more taxes in their community? So the one challenge you have, and I don't know that it's different for public power than it is for others, but it's certainly top of mind for us, is when that new load, given it's very lumpy and it might be 1,000 megawatts at a time, you wouldn't build a brand new skyscraper in Manhattan on spec. You'd have some anchor tenants. And we feel the same way about if we're building, huge new power plants or huge transmission investments, that we have to make sure that the people that are coming to town and asking us to build this new infrastructure to fuel their businesses are also not going to burden our existing customers, that they're going to take cost responsibility for it, that they're, if to the extent that they over ask, if they ask for twice as much as what they need, that they're going to have, some contractual obligation to pay for what they ask for, or at least for a large percentage of it. So I think we welcome it. We want to be flexible. Generally speaking, we're very, very good partners, and AI, data centers, manufacturing, we get a very outsized share of that load because of it. One of the large hyperscalers gets 60% of their power from public power utilities. We're not 60% of the electric grid. So I think that says something about how we're easy to deal with and can move quickly. But at the same time, we're looking out for the totality of our communities. And that means we want to see the jobs and the growth and the investment, but we also want to make sure that if we're building billions of dollars of new infrastructure for somebody coming to town, that it's a credible forecast and that they're really going to use it, and that cost is not going to go back to our other customers.
So, looking ahead, what changes do you think could reshape public power over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
So I think it's very similar to the industry as a whole, because our trends are not different from the rest of the industry, but probably not in the 5-year category, but certainly in the 10-year category. We have a lot of these members that are doing early projects, whether it's carbon capture or hydrogen or long duration storage. If those, or nuclear, we talked about nuclear. If those projects, if we can get to a point where those have cost and completion and schedule risk certainty. You know what a new nuclear plant works. Then that would be tremendous new clean firm technologies that would be available and are very necessary. So that's a trend that it's a little too soon to tell, but we have a lot of people that are proceeding apace with some projects. And if we were to able to get cost certainty, that would change how we get power in this country. We'll see a lot more transmission. I mean, I see a lot of our members investing in transmission. LCRA in Texas, for example, just announced, that they'll be spending $5 billion on transmission in Texas over the next 5 years. So a lot of transmission build out, a lot more load. We've got a lot of utilities that could grow from 50 to 100% in size. And then we also talked earlier, there's a lot of opportunities to not only think better, but use AI to make a real difference in our operations and be better. Better utilities, better at serving our customers, although a lot of those things, as we talked about, depend on not just the technology, but management's ability to implement the change and the organization's ability to accept it. So a lot goes into using good technology. It's not as simple as a piece of software and you buy it on the shelf.
So my last question for you is, if you could change one thing in today's energy policy landscape to better support public power, what would it be?
So this one is way in the weeds, but it's the number one ask of our members. We sell tax-exempt bonds, and in selling tax-exempt bonds, there is some out-of-date Treasury regulation of those tax-exempt bonds on something called private use. And what it means is it limits our ability to enter into long dated contracts with our customers. And there's really no reason that it's not a legislative reason. It's just a regulation that didn't anticipate these kinds of fast growing loads. And we're able to comply with it in the early stages of this build out. But as the build out goes on, it becomes an increasing challenge to comply with a regulation that just was not meant for this day and age. So really in the weeds, but it gives you an idea of what we're spending our time on in DC, because sometimes the unintended consequence of some minor, a few sentences can really make a very big difference. And the importance of that is if you can't contract with your customers, then you can't build the infrastructure that they need. So that is going to hit in the next few years, and we're working with the administration and Treasury to just go back and update the regulations and make sure that we're in the right position to continue to help the country grow.
Well, it sounds like kind of a no-brainer, but it's good that, the public power companies have a group like yourself behind them making these changes possible without having to get involved themselves, I guess. So great to hear.
It's one of those things that you have to work together because while it's a no-brainer, there's 50,000 things going on in Washington, D.C. And if you don't work together, it's hard to get from the 50,000 list to the top 50 list where something actually gets done. So that's the types of things we're working on.
Again, for listeners, I've been speaking with Tom Falcone, president of the Large Public Power Council. Tom, it's been a pleasure having you. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel would be important to mention before we wrap up the podcast?
Just that you're doing a great job. Thank you for having me on, and I appreciate listening to it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Power Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. It really helps others find the show. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, take care.